Jens Weigelt. He is moderating a panel to take stock of progress on implementing UNCCD Land Tenure Discussions with Violet Chivutse, Alastair Alinsato, Marioldi Sanchez Sandivanes, moderated by Jens Weigelt, and I will hand over to him. And then we are going to a debate on charting the way forward. Femor Karen Cosmoto, Ecosystem Restoration Promise from UNDP, Jean-Marc Sinam Sami from GEF, and Keka-san Basu, the founder and president of Green Hope Foundation. And then at the end of this, I'm going to try to draw some conclusions. We will have 2 opportunities for interaction during and at the end of the panel moderated by my friend Yes, and also when we are presenting charting the way forward, you are able to raise your questions and we will find a way to answer them. So again, warm welcome, happy to have you here. Let me briefly, in 2 minutes, introduce why we are organizing this session. The world has come to a global agreement that land degradation neutrality is necessary, that we have to increase efforts for restoration. There is the decade on ecosystem restoration. There are many efforts underway. We have the LDN focal points at the country level. So a lot of preparatory work has been done. What we want to do today is to demonstrate how it can be done. And this is, when we look at the sustainability agenda of the world, from my perspective, the most important question. We have the targets, we have the agreements, we have the organizations, but how are we going to do it? And today, we are not going to do theoretical discussions. We want to present the good examples of 4 countries, how they have done it. We would like to present how UNCCD has prepared its governance for it with the 2 hallmark decisions at the last 2 COPs in New Delhi and Abidjan. And we would like to highlight the importance of working together in order to make people and their rights agents of transformation. This is what we want to present and achieve in 1.5 hours. It sounds ambitious, it is ambitious, but I think this is exactly what we need. Let me please remind my colleagues here that please mute your microphones because I can hear kind of a background noise. Questions and answers, use F&A on the bottom. Dolmetschen means interpretation, and technical problems in the chat. With this introductory remark, I'm really happy to hand over to our keynote speaker. Andrea, happy that you are here. Thanks for displaying now, for having opened your video. You are the Deputy Executive Secretary of UNCCD, and you have been a minister and director in the Ministry of Energy and Environment of Costa Rica. So you know what it means to work at the national level, and now you are guiding us at the global governance level. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander. And it is my great pleasure to be in this side event on just transition towards land degradation neutrality. And I think that the title of this side event is precisely why we give so much importance to the agenda of land tenure and land degradation, because it is the only way when we are securing tenure rights. It is the only way that we can work with vulnerable communities, that we can achieve the multiple SDGs, because when we have insecure land tenure issues, then what we are doing at the end is really blocking the access to credits. It's really blocking the access to even technical assistance in some cases. And I would like to share with you a little story coming from my side. When I started my professional career, I started working in this NGO in Costa Rica, and we were working in this remote side in the Osa Peninsula, where we have Corcovado National Park, and it's a very important area in terms of land conservation. And we were there trying to connect these two important national parks with a lot of small landholders living there in this forest reserve. And the issue there was that we were promoting some different type of contracts, negotiating with them. How can they be doing agriculture, but also managing their small properties and protecting part of the forest? But the big issue at that moment, and it still is an issue today, is that most of these properties there are without land titles. And in that moment, we were negotiating, trying to mobilize payment of environmental services contracts with them. And this was the big barrier that we were facing at the end. We were talking and we were giving technical assistance to the small farmers, but then we were facing all these other legal issues. And if we take a look at what is happening at the global scale, we see that there are a lot of barriers that are really then blocking the access to secure land tenure aspects. And this is becoming then a cross-cutting aspect that we need to address when we see what the opportunities we see, and you mentioned them, Alexander, that within this convention, we have two decisions that will allow us to work with the parties, with the countries, to enhance these policy frameworks at the national, at the local level, but there is still much work to do. And that this is at the end an issue that it is direct, that it has a direct linkage to gender issues, that it has a direct linkage to different aspects, socioeconomical aspects, and of course, these environmental aspects. So at the end, this is why from UNCCD, we are so committed to this agenda. This is why we're working with partners as FAO to develop these guidelines to see how can we implement in the field some specific arrangements to address this land tenure issue. It's a huge opportunity, and it is just a big aspect that we need to address if we really want to be effective to achieve all the different SDGs. So I will leave my remarks here, and thank you. And I know that with the team and with hearing from the specific experiences in different countries, we can learn, we can really accelerate the implementation of land restoration processes, but also taking into account land tenure. Thank you, Alexander. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. Exactly 5 minutes. You have set the benchmark. My key takeaway message is that today, land rights, unsecure land rights, are very often a barrier to sustainability or to achieve food security or land degradation neutrality. What we are going to present today is what do we have to do to make land rights a supportive instrument to achieve the internationally agreed goals. And you mentioned that economics, ecological consideration, and social issues are going together. And I would also only like to add that this side event takes place at the high-level political forum where the SDG on gender and equality is under review. And what we are doing here is a contribution to the review of this SDG. Thanks a lot. I'm happy now to introduce our next speakers. The title of the session is Global Agreements to Advance Legitimate Tenure Rights for Land Degradation Neutrality. We have Miriam Medel Garcia, Chief of External Relations Policy and Advocacy of UNCCD, and Li Feng, the Director of Land and Water Division at FAO. Both are excellent experts, both are friends, and I'm really happy that you are here. And I think it does not happen very often that UNCCD and FAO do a joint presentation. And here we go. The floor is yours. Miriam, you are going to start.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And it is indeed an honor and a pleasure for me to be here with all of you. I will actually disagree on the fact that FAO and UNCCD don't have joint presentations. We actually do. And we have many issues that link us together, us being the Secretariat of a convention, but then FAO being this amazing and very far-reaching implementing agency on the ground that has the contacts on the ground with the parties. And so we have many work streams together. However, I would say probably one of the most prominent ones has been the land tenure one, and the development of the technical guide on the integration of the Vgdt into LDN that I'm going to describe now. And I mean, it's like a lot of acronyms, but actually, well, hopefully this will be a useful session for everyone in understanding the importance of these acronyms for the lives of people around the world. So what I will do is just provide you a little bit of context on how the issue gained prominence in our process, in the UNCCD process. And then my colleagues from FAO, specifically Li Feng, will give a more detailed presentation on the technical guide, its scope, target audience, key consideration, and implementation approaches. So we are talking from the UNCCD perspective, we're talking about land degradation neutrality, or what we call LDN. And people who are familiar with the climate change context, for example, I mean, it's kind of our carbon neutral, but applied to the, I mean, this is a very rough simile, but it applied to the land. So what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve the land, the amount of land that we are degrading inevitably due to human activity, agriculture, etc., equals is not more than the land that we are restoring, conserving, preserving. So achieving LDN is an ambitious target of the Sustainable Development Goals, the ones that the goal 15 specifically, land on life, that is being examined by the high-level political forum these weeks. And the UNCCD is the custodian of this target 15.3 for SDG 15. There are now, we are very happy, there are over 130 countries pursuing voluntary land degradation neutrality targets with the support of the UNCCD and partners as FAO. And for us, LDN represents a holistic approach to improving the amount and quality of land resources over soil, over water, over biodiversity, to support ecosystems, functions, and services which are necessary for life on this planet, and specifically for human life. Now, why are we bringing land tenure into the conversation around land degradation neutrality? We actually have scientific evidence for that. We have a body, the Science Policy Interface, which published a report on responsible land governance as a critical enabling factor for improving land management and incentivizing land restoration. And it speaks a bit to what Andrea was saying from her personal experience. If you do not have secure tenure rights, then the restoration projects probably will not be as successful as expected. So land-based solutions, also our perspective is that land-based solutions start with the people, those who care for the land, those who work the land. So the right to access or control land are defined by the relationship with each other and with institutions. So, and then we get into these very difficult conversations and very diverse situations around the world where we have policy and regulatory environments, we have land administration arrangements that we have to consider. But however, everybody in our context has agreed we need secure tenure rights. We need for people to feel that they actually can work this land, that can get benefits from it, economic benefits and others. So with a very strong push from civil society, and this is also one of the very beautiful things about this decision, that civil society was the one who brought it up to the parties. In 2019, the parties to the convention adopted a landmark decision on land tenure, decision 26. It very much is the first time a multilateral environmental agreement explicitly addresses the issue of land tenure with clarity, full clarity on the link. So a convention on land, like our convention, needs to address land governance head-on and needs to demonstrate how secure tenure can be a catalyst for better management practices that contribute to sustainability and ultimately to human and planetary health. So what will this mean in practice? The technical guide aims to bridge a gap between the two frameworks for action. So we have the LDN initiatives that I have already described. And then on the other side, we have the voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure, which were developed by FAO's Committee on Food Security 10 years ago, actually precisely 10 years ago. During our COP in Abidjan, we celebrated the 10th year anniversary. And then the question is, how do we bring the LDN framework with the principles of the Vgdt? What are the concrete actions to improve tenure security, especially for the most vulnerable, which is also proved, it's proved once and again, are the ones that suffer the most when there is no tenure, no secure tenure, including indigenous peoples and local communities, women, youth, pastoralists, and basically all those groups who are working, who make the land their livelihood. So the technical guide, in our view, together with FAO, and actually guided by the decision of our parties, the technical guide is the first step for bridging this gap. So we, when we started to put our heads together to bring these two agendas together, it was very evident that tenure is very contextual. It looks different in every country in the world, and it looks different across communities within the same country. So it is a challenge to develop a universal guide that is applicable to all countries. So with this in mind, we designed the guide that goes as follows. It is voluntary and flexible. So actions can be tailored to specific national and local contexts. It's action-oriented. We propose a set of clear and concise actions. It's multi-scaling approach because then it allows for a fit-for-purpose land administrative frameworks at the scale that is required by the country. And then finally, it is rooted in the COP decisions and the voluntary guidelines, which means that it responds to the multilateral agreements. The approach was very well received by our parties and other stakeholders. I am very happy to report. We just had our COP 15, our 15th session of our COP. Our COP takes place every 2 years. Our 15th session was held in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, in May 2022. And then our parties gave us a vote of confidence, but they also made some commitments themselves. So they strengthened their commitment to discuss land tenure. Based on the discussion at COP and the adopted decisions, what are the next steps? Well, we will work in now translating the technical guide and putting the content of the technical guide into policy and administrative frameworks to advance action on the ground, which is what we really want. This will require building innovative partnerships, providing technical support, and exploring financial opportunities for countries to enhance tenure security through their LDN initiatives. It will also mean awareness raising, because it is critical to make the link between tenure and land degradation visible to all actors, and also to promote the participation of those who work the land in the conversation. And then it will also mean monitoring and reporting, as we were mandated to continue exploring indicators and data to increase our knowledge base, including disaggregated data on women and youth land rights. So I will stop here with I hope I had provided a good overview on where we're coming from, what's the aim of the technical guide, and then also describe a little bit the homework and the road that we have ahead of us to implement the new COP decision, the COP 15 decision 27 on land tenure. I leave it up to Li Feng, and I'm here to respond to any questions that you may have afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam. Distinguished guests, panelists, it's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to present the joint CCD and FAO effort supported by many other partners, such as the TGM, so as to produce the technical guidance on how to integrate Vgdt into the UNCCD implementation and LDN. Well, Miram already talked about where it comes from and where we are going forward. And this technical guide is really a comprehensive entry point that provides an overview of the possible actions to be taken to address the multiple challenges related to land tenure and related to degradation drivers. The intention of this guide is to be practical and addressing how to integrate the Vgdt and LTN at the national and local levels, build upon existing Vgdt technical guidance and other relevant publications. The main audience certainly are the policymakers, decision makers. This is why the technical guide gave an entry point, but does not go into the methodological details. However, the guide contains lots of references that can further inform the formulation and implementation of the LDN initiatives. And it will be particularly useful for land administrators and other relevant stakeholders. So based on the Vgdt's principles, the guide includes in all three suggested actions in three main considerations. The first one, the recognition and documentation and safeguards of the legitimate land tenures. And the concept is really at the heart of the Vgdt's principle and looks at not only the tenure rights already considered in the legal framework, but also those benefiting from the social acceptance and recognition. Secondly, the need for informed and meaningful consultation and participation of all concerned stakeholders. And thirdly, the need to adopt a gender-responsive approach. Next slide, please. Let me here just to quickly give an overview of the Vgdt and explain why they are so important for taking into consideration considering the tenure into the UNCCD implementation. The Vgdt, they were negotiated by the governments, civil societies, private sector, and academia representatives, and endorsed by the Committee on World Food Security 10 years ago in 2012. These are the only international agreed framework on the governance of tenure. Secondly, they are based on a human rights-based approach, and they are a consensus on the best practice to promote governance of tenure. Thirdly, they are a reference to improve the governance of tenure, and particularly to recognize, document, and safeguard all legitimate tenure rights. Next, please. Let's now dig into the technical guide. The technical guide presented 9 practical action-oriented pathways on the key aspect of governance of the tenure that can be addressed to support the UNCCD implementation. The first 4 pathways I'm going to present now are considered as the universal pathways, which means that all LD initiatives can integrate them. First, the enhancing policy and legal framework, which focus on the actions to recognize legitimate tenure rights in policy and legal frameworks, and to better align policy and legal frameworks related to tenure to those related to the land management. Second one, establishing the targeted coordination mechanisms, which highlights the actions to improve the coordination between sectors, stakeholders across all the levels, and to improve data and interoperability between the concerned government sectors. A third one is really about securing women's tenure right and access to natural resources. Look at advancing women's tenure right by raising awareness, capacity, participation in decision-making within the communities in order to enhance women's access and tenure security to land. Fourthly, setting up transparent grievance and dispute resolution mechanisms, which gives the indications on grievance and readdressing mechanisms, because LDN initiative may result in increasing the land value, which can trigger infringement of legitimate tenure rights, particularly of those of the most vulnerable. Next, please. The technical guide also contains The 5 pathways that are context related depend on the tenure or degradation issues met by the LDN initiative. Pathway 5 really look at the designing and implementing tenure responsive and participatory integrated land use planning. Then pathway 6 really focuses on the supporting LDN through the land administration tools, mainly land consolidation and land banking on the private and public lands. Pathway 7 and 8 highlight actions to recognizing and documenting legitimate tenure rights, respectively on public land and commons. Finally, the pathway 9 really gives the indication to allocating and strengthening the right and duties on the private land. Next, please. As we reckon that not a single pathway can address the variety of tenure challenges met by the LDN initiative, the technical guidance also provide more detail on how to build a multiple pathway approach that's mixing the universal and the context-specific pathways based on the initial tenure by physical and gender assessment. Next, please. So quickly, in conclusion, there are 6 key messages to end my presentation. First, secure tenure increases the positive impact of LDN initiatives for people and the planet. Secondly, addressing tenure in LDN initiatives begins with the assessment of the local needs and conditions. Thirdly, meaningful and inclusive consultation and participation of all stakeholders is essential to ensure that the legitimate tenure rights are not overlooked in LDN initiatives. Next. Fourthly, gender-responsive approaches address underlying inequalities in control and access to land resources are needed for realizing transformative changes. Fifth, awareness raising and the sharing of the lessons learned on the responsible land governance enhanced dialogue, partnership, and mutual learning. Last but not least, data and indicators on land governance are currently limited in scope, but essential for tracking progress and identifying the gaps to be met in the future. I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to the further discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to UNCCD and FAO, to Miriam and Li Feng. Always a pleasure listening to you. Now, we want to leave the global agreements level, which you have presented so very well, the voluntary guidelines as adopted by the Committee on Food Security and the hallmark decisions of UNCCD COP in New Delhi and now in Abidjan, and your presentation, how to implement it. And now we are going to the ground. We are going to countries. We have a moderated panel where we want to take stock of progress on implementing UNCCD Land Tenure Decisions. And this is the basis then for charting the way forward, which we're going to discuss afterwards. I'm handing over, with thanks to you, Li Feng and Miriam, to my friend and colleague, Jess Weigel from TMG. Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander, for your kind introduction, and thank you, panelists, for the fascinating contributions so far. And I would like to take those as basically as a segue. You were mentioning the question of how to make these decisions matter on the ground. And I think I would like to use this to introduce this fascinating panel. And I think the best way to introduce them is to say that if one of them were missing, we would not succeed in making the CCD land tenure decision matter on the ground. And I will introduce our panelists now, and then we'll introduce or contextualize their contributions. First, our panelists represent different roles and they work at different levels. And I'll work my way up from the local up to the global level. Violet Chivutse is director of the Shibuya Community Health Workers in Kakamega County, Kenya. Alastair Nsato is cabinet director of the Benin Ministry of Development and Government Action Coordination. And last but not least, Marioldi Sanchez is former UNCCD Civil Society panel member from EDE in Peru. Now, TMG has the pleasure of working with Shibuya community health workers since about 5 years in innovating new ways of securing land use rights through land lease agreements. And you might wonder why this matters to LDN. The reason is straightforward. Short-term and insecure use rights are a disincentive to actually invest in land and ecosystem restoration. And Violet will address the experience that we made and will highlight why this is particularly important to secure the land use rights of women. And Alexander was mentioning already that at this high-level political forum, SDG 5 on gender equality is at the center of the debate. Now, these community-based initiatives, such as the one that Violet will describe, are key pillars from our point of view and our experience of land and ecosystem restoration. However, if there is no enabling, let's say, policy and institutional environment, initiatives such as the one led by Violet will find it very hard to sustain and to scale. And that's why I'm very, very happy that Alastair could free up some time with this busy agenda, because beyond agreeing on national land degradation neutrality targets, the government of Benin is proactively investing in exploring how to protect legitimate land tenure rights of communities living in LDN priority areas, and Alastair will address this enabling environment. And last but not least, I will come to Marioldi. Marioldi will address an important question from our point of view. Land tenure, as we all know, can be quite a thorny issue. It addresses gender inequalities, it addresses historical injustices, and sometimes it addresses the question of elite capture. And that's why it is so key to ensure that there are checks and balances at the global level. And the UNCCD Civil Society panel was instrumental in arriving at the UNCCD Land Tenure Decisions. And the panel has fulfilled an important role in this regard, and I hope will continue in the future fulfilling that role, and Marioldi will speak to that contribution. For the benefit of all of us, as Alexander did, I will have a close look at the time. So whenever, to my panelists, whenever I turn my camera back on, you have 1 minute left to speak. So without further ado, Violet, as I indicated, we work our way from the local level up. The floor is yours. A warm welcome.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope I'm audible enough.
Thank you very well.
Thank you. So as Alexander said, Jess says, my name is Violet Shibutse from a community-based organization called Shibuya Community Health Workers, which is situated in the western region of Kenya in a county called Kakamega. Shibuya Community Health Workers was founded in 1999 as an organization that was responding to the crisis of health, which was HIV/AIDS. Therefore, food security and nutrition is at the center of our programming on day-to-day. And that's why Shibuya found ourselves working on advancing women land rights from the experience that we had gotten as we did our work with women who had lost their husbands, who had been denied accessibility to land. In 2016, Shibuya began partnership with TMG Berlin, looking at the land accessibility models that exist. In Kenya, the most ways that we have been advancing on accessibility to land has been inheriting land or purchasing of land, which are not very cost-friendly for women, and they also have very long procedures that most women and youth cannot be able to follow and access land to advance their activities in agriculture. Therefore, land leasing was one of the easiest way that women and youth could access land in a more quicker way, which was also cost-friendly. However, it was challenged with so many conflicts, and also it was not streamlined by the government or any institution. So people were leasing land just like from mutual understanding between verbally, and in most cases, this brought many conflicts that even some of them brought death and family separation and many others, including increasing poverty, because some men were leasing land without even their spouses being aware or their wives being aware. So we began with doing community consultation meetings in 2 wards. We began with a ward called Isuha Centro, where we did consultations with the assistant chiefs, key stakeholders, to see how relevant streamlining land lease is, and if people think it was important. And everyone was saying this should have come yesterday. So we began from this process of conducting consultations, awareness from stakeholders and to stakeholders. And then we agreed to form drafting committees, which were put at the lowest level, which we call sub-location. Each sub-location in the first ward, 4 wards, had a drafting committee that was speaking to the farmers, speaking to the community, people who have leased land previously, and the leasers, to actually see, come up with how a land leasing guideline would look like. After this, we were able to bring together all the drafting committees to harmonize the drafts that they had. And we conducted a validation meeting with the key stakeholders at the ward levels and farmers, of course, with women and youth, to look at the draft that we had and give more input, agree that this would actually help to streamline the land lease guidelines. From that, we had the first draft, which we all agreed upon, and we used this to sensitize the community to actually ensure that people were using the land lease guidelines in leasing land or accessing land. In the first step in these 2 wards, we received a lot of success. The chiefs, assistant chiefs, and key leaders adopted, including the village elders, adopted the land lease guidelines, which also had an application form that you fill as an agreement when you are leasing land. And it is from this process that now we actually now went to the county level to sensitize the county level stakeholders to look at this process and show them success that we are getting in these 2 wards and use it to see if this is something that can be adopted at the county level. From that, we got consensus, including consensus from the governor. We did a documentary, and we used this to continue popularizing the land lease guidelines, and also came up with a process of an agreement to say we need to institutionalize this process to be adopted by the county government as a bylaw for Kakamega County or legislations. It is a story that is really successful, but I want to come to what we have been able to realize as achievements in this process.
And my sister, if you could sort of come to close and wrap up your contribution. You will have a chance to speak afterwards, but sort of to just give you the time to wrap up.
Thank you. So we have many chiefs and assistant chiefs have adopted the land lease guidelines. We are now in 15 wards. The land lease guidelines have gone through a process of adoption by the county government with the legal attorney of the county. Many women and youth have been able to access land for agriculture, especially many women, of course, have really been able, and women are participating in land conservation activities that communities are doing, including accessibility to farm inputs. We conducted a monitoring and evaluation process that actually really brought to light how the land lease guidelines have worked effectively for Kakamega County in the wards where we began, and even in other wards where we haven't done this streamlining. The chiefs and assistant chiefs are adopting the application form because it's really working well for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet. Thank you really for this contribution. In the second round, I would ask if you could maybe then speak about the impact on the land lease guidelines had on soil rehabilitation, but we keep this for the second round. I will do something that I would normally not do, which is skip one speaker, but not because I'm not interested in his contribution, but he has encountering technical issues. So that's why I'm wondering, Marioldi, do you already feel like making your contribution because we have lost Alastair for a minute?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, thank you, Marioldi, for your flexibility, and the floor is yours. And I will try to at least intrusive way possible remind you of the time. So thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to participate in this panel. Thank you for the invitation. And I would like to start by saying that the hallmark decision on land tenure that was promoted by the UNCCD CSO panel has indeed contributed significantly to a greater recognition by state and non-state actors of the importance of ensuring rights to equal use and ownership of land in countries' efforts towards LDN. And this has also given greater support to the actions that civil society organizations have been developing for several years, with the purpose of strengthening land tenure security for populations that are in conditions of vulnerability. And I might say that one of the major challenges to move ahead with the implementation of land tenure decisions is for governments to engage effectively with populations in situations of vulnerability, so as to ensure that their rights and interests are secured in policy discussions relevant to the governance of use of the land. And we believe CSOs can play and are playing a relevant role in supporting this engagement because of the close relationship that CSOs have with these populations, the interaction, the collective learning initiatives that we have with indigenous peoples, rural communities, women and youth. So I am glad that the CSO's role is being recognized more every time. For example, the analysis that was made by the TMG in 4 countries also show that national CSOs have an important role in the alignment of the land tenure rights with conservation and restoration needs. So partnership between governments and CSOs is a powerful strategy for the implementation of the land tenure decisions. This has also been recognized recently in COP15. And I must say that one of the immediate tasks would be to find experiences of these kind of partnerships around the world and socialize them widely to inspire the replication and provide reference to parties also on how parties and other CSOs on how to really have effectively partnerships around land tenure. Also, I would like to highlight the importance of legitimate representation and participation of communities, women and youth in the definition of policies and measures related to land in order to protect their land rights. And I'm saying this because in many countries, there are not no appropriate mechanisms for the population to elect their representatives in such a way that they are effectively represent a great diversity of the perspectives and interests. And this is more relevant in countries like mine, Peru, that are culturally diverse. So this is a big challenge. And on the other hand, ensuring access to the participation of these populations in land governance platforms is not the only priority, because many of them also require support to strengthen their capacity so that they not only participate, but also interact equitably with the other actors for negotiations and agreements. So on this regard, there are also a lot of examples of capacity building and organizational strengthening for a fair and equitable land governance in different parts of the world. I can share what my organization, AIDER, is doing in Peru. We are a Peruvian CSOs. We are supporting indigenous peoples in the Peruvian Amazon for enhancing their land tenure security. Indigenous lands are currently very threatened by illegal activities, particularly illegal crops. So we are currently supporting capacity building of indigenous men and women of these 7 communities to be the direct promoters of its own proposal for the integrated management of their land forests. So this way they will be more effective in communicating the perspective and interests of their communities to their indigenous organizations that represent them at the subnational and national level. And I think I'm running out of time, so maybe I would like to finalize with 2 recommendations that CSOs made during the COP15 regarding the implementation of land tenure decisions. The first one is to increase efforts to raise awareness on the COP decisions and on the technical guide. I think this has been also mentioned before. It's important at national and subnational level working under an intersectoral approach and engaging non-stakeholders. Also the translation to the technical guide into local languages. And the second and the final one is to visualize the synergies related to land tenure in the different tools and initiatives within the UNCCD and the SDGs in order to increase efficiency and ensure coherence. Thanks for the opportunity to share. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Marioldi. This was concise and very much to the point. May I ask if Bruno, do I read the list of participants correctly that Alistair has not yet managed to join again?
This is correct.
Okay, well then I have a question. Thank you, Bruno. To you, Violet, first. And I indicated already, you mentioned the monitoring that you did in Kakamega County on the impact of the land lease guidelines. Could you maybe expand a bit on the question of how the use of the land lease guidelines is related to better soil management practices?
Thank you so much, yes. Yeah, when we did monitoring and evaluation on how the land lease guidelines has advanced many activities, including contribution to sustainable land use and management, we were actually able to find that where most women have not been participating in sustainable land use management activities like soil rehabilitation, because when you don't have land, you cannot actually be able to engage in these activities, because most families give a piece of land where you till this year and then next year they tell you to shift to another place. And because of consistency, where women lease land like for 3 years, they were able to do activities like terracing, mulching, organic farming, activities that really was looking at how to increase production, but also advance soil management and rehabilitation. We even looked at the land that had been degraded and was just there in the community that was not being used. When women leased this land as a group in one area called Ilesi, they were able to rehabilitate this land and be able to make it a productive land for agriculture. We also looked at issues of soil and water conservation, where people who lease land that is in a slopey area, how they were misusing this land and there was a lot of erosion. But women partnered with organizations that were doing sustainable land use, soil rehabilitation and management, and did crop slope barriers, vegetative crop slope barriers that were also feeding their animals. Some of these crop slope barriers like vetiver, like desmodium, to feed their animals, but at the napier, growing of napier grass in farm for issues of responding to pests and diseases like armyworms and whatever. So the women planted this napier so that they would be able to use the napier for their animals, but at the same time, this napier was playing a very critical role together with desmodium in the push and pull response to pest management without using chemical fertilizer. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet. While Alistair is still busy trying to resolve his technical matters, Marioldi, I would like to turn to you. If I've understood you correctly, you basically said, and please expand on it if I did, by giving the rights to the communities that you work with, the communities are then in the position to experiment and pilot those restoration and management technologies that are adapted to their lifestyle, so that actually the link between livelihood needs and restoration is being achieved. Did I understand you correctly there?
That's me, yes.
Sorry, Violet, I was directing the question towards Marioldi.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, exactly. Well, actually, the experience, particularly the one that we are promoting in Peru, in the case of indigenous peoples, yes, they are now facing threats of the invasion of their lands, for example. So it's not only when we think about land tenure, security is not only related, for example, for the access or the recognition of the rights of the access and the use of the land of the resources, but also it's about the security in time, the sustainability of that access. So in the case of indigenous peoples in Peru, they have a recognition, formal recognition of their lands, and they are actually engaged in different platforms. But in the practice, it's very hard, and they continue struggling for the security and the respect of these rights that are already granted. So it's important to provide them the capacity to be to really be the one that can engage directly in the platforms to bring their own perspectives to the government, to the decision makers. And what I was referring also with legitimate participation is that sometimes, because there is a wide diversity of experiences, of realities, sometimes it's very hard. And you may think that representation is there, but in reality, it's not covering all the diversity of interests and of challenges. So yes, it's important when you provide the tools and the capacities to the community-based initiatives to be the ones that could really engage and engage through the existent platforms and organizations that already exist, to advocate and to really make their voices heard. That's what I was referring when talking about the recognition of and the legitimate participation. I don't know if that's what.
Perfect. No, that's and in fact sort of what we were honored to be able to contribute to the technical guide that CCD and FAO have developed. And in fact, one of the key elements that we have elaborated on in the technical guide is basically that what is legitimacy in the respective countries is not yet really defined, and which is really a big stepping stone. If I understand you correctly, in a culturally very diverse setting, defining what is a legitimate land right is an effort that really requests a lot of input, for example, civil society organizations, to actually make those voices being heard. And I think this is also what one of our listeners is asking, and she is asking what is necessary to, let's say, systematically implement such processes that you have been describing. Also the question then to Violet, but I would like to begin with you, Marioldi. What do you think would be necessary if the process that you've undergone with your colleagues in the seven communities, what would be necessary to scale such an approach?
Yeah, well, first of all, and I think this is something that has already been identified and communicated widely, and somehow the land tenure decision is trying to capture this, is the political willingness at the highest level. This kind of process related to land governance really need to a high level commitment in the national governments, but also at the subnational level. So I'm saying this because this takes, these kind of efforts will require of long-term commitment and also of investment of resources. And this is one of the reasons why sometimes the platforms are not achieving the goals, because you really need to invest in making these kind of platforms really work effectively. Meaning, for example, if you really want effective participation of this variety of diversity of groups, you need really to prepare them. You really need to build capacities, to organize. And this sometimes is for some people, it's like expensive. It needs a lot of resources and time. It's time consuming, and sometimes the expertise or the presence of government, it's not in the ground, right? To really organize the action and build capacities. So I will say this is the 2-3 main things: the political commitment and also the willingness to invest in making this work effectively.
Thank you, Marioldi. Violet, I would like to forward the same question by our listener to you. From your point of view, what is needed actually this very intensive process of consultation, and what is needed from your point of view to actually scale these initiatives up?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think when you listen to my presentation, what is coming out strongly is the participation of community and the kind of partnership that we were able to work together with TMG to put community at the forefront of planning and designing of the program. I think that gives this program a mileage, because when communities are leading, then they are able to put this in their own context on how they live and who is, like, if we use the spirit of SDG, who is being left behind. They are able to define that in a more clear way. So I think to advance this, we need to actually borrow a leaf from this exercise on the importance of putting communities to the forefront. My friend has just spoken about capacity building. What kind of capacity building are we talking about? It is not just we are going to train. I didn't mention anywhere where we are saying TMG came to train Shibuye. No, but we work together, learning from each other, and even involvement of government, where we are learning from each other and progressing every day, and even using the pilot programs as a basis of learning, recording successes, and being able to advance. So I think for me, I would actually say that that is the most important thing, and also the political will, which has been mentioned here. And one thing that I also have learned from this is we do not just want to leave these very good initiatives there. We actually are continuing to pursue to promote them to become policy. Once they become policy that has been developed by the people, a process that began by the people, then there is ownership, and even the policies that are usually formed and are lying on the shelves in offices. This is not an example of one, because the people are already using it, and there is already participation of the community to ensure the policy is going to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet, and thank you, Marioldi. And I apologize to our viewers and participants that Alastair has, until now, unfortunately not yet managed to join back online. So, Alexander, I would like to hand back over to you. Thanking you, Marioldi and Violet, for your interesting contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Yes, Marioli and Violet. What we have seen and what we have listened to was the experience of how to implement UNCCD land tenure decisions on the ground. Violet informing us about the process she has made, and thanks a lot, Violet, for great collaboration on the ground with her women's health group in ensuring land rights as a precondition to really work on LDN. Thanks, Marioldi, for putting the experiences into the broader frame and looking at where do we stand today and what needs to be done. And it's a pity that Alastair, with whom we work closely, could not present what is the role of governments in implementing LDN neutrality and how to use the voluntary guidelines. So this was a stock-taking exercise, and I want to repeat what Jess had already mentioned. It takes all three. It takes NGOs, civil society to work on the ground. It takes a government to create this enabling environment. And it takes an international organization to guide everything. Together, they can make it work. And I would like to come back to the question raised by one of the participants. What process do you need? I think the inclusive process organized by the needs of the local actors is really, really very, very important. So setting up an adequate, appropriate process, working in a transparent way and applying the principles of the Vgdt is absolutely important. Now we are coming to the way forward, charting the way forward. And I would like to call Femo Karen Mozzo from Ecosystem Restoration Promise from UNTP to switch on her camera, Jean-Marc Sinasamy from the Global Environmental Facility, and Kekasan Basu, the founder and president of Green Hope. I would like to call you on stage so that you can join us. Thanks a lot. I can see all three of you. Thanks for joining. Now, after having listened to what has been presented from FAO and UNCCD, the experiences, the stock taking, I would like to start with you, Femo, on how would you describe the way forward? What is needed from the perspective of your organization to really make ecosystem restoration, land degradation neutrality work? What needs to be done? Femo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting UNDP and myself to be part of this conversation. Very important question. In fact, at the just ended, well, in May, Abidjan COP15 UNCCD COP, a minister of one country came to us and said, we as the government have set LDN targets, we have Aichi targets, and they will at some point be replaced by the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework targets. We have NDCs. How do we move forward? And this is a genuine question that many governments have. And of course, we expect governments to have the answers, right? But a lot of them are also looking for answers. They're overwhelmed about the amount of work that actually lies ahead to move from making commitments and pledges and setting targets to actually reach implementation stage. And this is the hard part, where we all have to put our hands on deck to support this action at the national level, and in fact at all levels, if we're going to actually build that global movement for restoring degraded ecosystems, as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration would like to sort of inspire. So the creation of an enabling environment, you know, to take on some of the discussions that the UNCCD put in front of us is particularly key. It can be overwhelming for a government to know where to start, because this is when we talk about land restoration or ecosystem restoration, this is an area that spans across all areas of government in terms of management of resources on land and even in other ecosystems, but also all aspects of society, all the way from government to the individual using land, and even individuals that don't have land tenure rights or don't have legal access to rights, but they do live on land and utilize land, and you know, some of that access is insecure. So how do you include everybody to participate in and contribute to land restoration or sustainable land management, if you like? So when the speakers were talking, I was actually thinking about what happens on communal land in particular, where, you know, sometimes the rights are there, but they are not defined, and people use land, but it's in some cases they are using the land, but they don't have legal rights to use in that land, or there is some kind of insecurity. How do you mobilize such people to participate in restoring landscapes and land and ecosystems that they do not own, that they do not have legal rights to? And this is difficult. I mean, we've seen over decades how, you know, in the past there used to be traditional access and customary rights and traditional uses of rights that were defined at community levels, which have somewhat been removed and replaced with modern systems of governance that don't always actually perform the way they are meant to perform. So we then have a messy middle where all sorts of difficult things happen, including degradation, including things like exclusion of some groups, including things like illegal use, land grabs, if you like. So I think when we move into this stage of implementing LDN and bringing everybody along, including the private sector, including parts of community that are marginalized or previously discriminated against, it's going to require a lot of work at the policy level, regulatory level, to set up laws and policies and strategies that bring everybody along, consultation, stakeholder engagement for actually agreeing on where the restoration should happen, what it should look like, what form it should take, and even defining degradation itself is going to require multiplicity of views and inclusion of different knowledge systems, not just science by geographers or land surveyors, but also traditional understandings and knowledge of what land should look like, what it looks like when it's degraded. So UNDP, we want to actually initiate this work. We are in the process of conceptualization of the ecosystem restoration promise, where we will actually support government to sit down, look at their land degradation neutrality targets, understand what they have pledged to do, and understand where to begin, where the challenges are, where the gaps are, where the opportunities are, how to bring everybody along, what laws and policies they need to change or enact in order to facilitate land degradation neutrality to actually happen.
Thanks a lot, Femo. You mentioned a word I like a lot, the missing middle. And some people say not only we have to talk about the missing middle, we also have to talk about the missing investments. And this, of course, is a question I would like to raise to our next speaker, to Jean-Marc from GEF. Jean-Marc, the way forward, without money, there will be no way forward. So what is your take on the financial needs, the investment strategies, and how to link land rights and restoration needs in a meaningful way together? Jean-Marc, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining.
Sure, I'm unmute, and I guess this is the case. Thank you, Alexander, and thank you for inviting me and for inviting the GF. And it's a pleasure to be with you, especially surrounded by Kekashan and Femo. So nice to see you both. First of all, I would like to remind that the GF, the Global Environment Facility, the aim of the GF is to generate global environment benefits. So this is what we finance. And today we are the 7th of July, 2022. And so we have started officially the new GEF cycle, the new GEF 8 cycles. And I guess we have some good news to share with you. Thanks to an excellent negotiation led by the GEF CEO, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, and the World Bank and all the colleagues from the GEF Secretariat, recipient countries and donor countries have succeeded to very successful GEF replenishment, historical replenishment with $5.3 billion for the next 4 years, and with an increase of resources for the land degradation focal area, and the possibility to develop integrated programs, especially on ecosystem restoration and several land-based use issues. So I would like to, before talking about the way forward, I would like to remind a little bit the evolution of the LDN target, the land degradation neutrality targets, and how we have supported several countries now to set up this LDN target. Initially, when these LDN targets were endorsed, these voluntary LDN targets were endorsed by the countries in Ankara, actually. We launched and we contributed to the LDN target setting program. And initially, we had in mind the idea to support 60 countries. And at the end of the day, it's 129 countries who endorse the LDN targets. And right now, I guess it's a little bit more than 100 countries who have defined their targets. So it was a very good signal for us to see that the countries, were interested and endorse these LDN targets. But defining the LDN target is one point, and it can be a scientific or technical exercise. But the next step is to really find the right level of endorsement in the country, the right political levels. There is one point that is very clear in all the agendas we are supporting, biodiversity, climate change, land degradation, and others, is that we need to address the institutional failures that is leading us to environmental catastrophe. So we need to get out from a sectoral approach. We need to find the ways to have the environmental sectors and agriculture and infrastructure and transport working together in different ways. So the level of the political endorsement of the LDN target is really a very important point. And then we need to find the right way to attach, if I can say like that, to attach or to mainstream or to integrate the LDN targets to operational instrument in the countries at national, at provincial, or at local levels. So I guess the LDN targets, setting up the LDN targets have been one step. There are other steps ahead, the political endorsement, and also all the aspects, to store the information, to monitor the information, to connect this information to different financing and planning mechanism. But I guess the good point is that the LDN targets represent a very powerful system and very convincing system, not only for the countries who are going to set up or who are going to endorse these LDN targets, but also for all the donors, all the partners who want to help the countries actually to do better on the ground with local communities, with indigenous people. So I guess in the good news for Jeff8 is that LDN targets is really at the LDN targets are really at the center of the LDN, of the land degradation focal area. It's going to be possible to use the LDN targets under several integrated approaches, and we need now to improve actually this LDN targets. I guess our colleagues from FAO mentioned the guidelines on voluntary land tenure, and we have already financed some countries like DRC to test this kind of approach. We have supported other countries like the Gambia or Madagascar actually to develop a local approach with LDN targets. So I guess there is a lot of examples we are going to try to scale up during the next Jeff8 exercise. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jean-Marc. So we have come now a long way. We have discussed the overarching governance of land tenure, voluntary guidelines, the decisions of UNCCD. We have received information from what happened on the ground, how to do it. We have listened to two speakers making excellent presentations on the way forward. And now, last but absolutely not least, we are coming to Kekasan Basu, founder of Green Hope, a global social innovation enterprise that works to empower young people. And the question of empowerment and the role of women in sustainable development and how to involve social innovation in the whole process. We are very interested on your take on the way forward. The floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alexander, and good morning, everyone from New York. I'm joining you from inside the United Nations. I'm here in person at the HLPF, and I am really, really delighted to be here today and share this virtual space with all of you. So I really feel that this year's HLPF is being held at an opportune moment because our world is now slowly and steadily emerging from the greatest crisis in living memory. And we all know how the pandemic has really pushed back progress on all fronts, and with the disadvantaged and the vulnerable even more so. So for me, as a UNCCD land hero who's been working with communities on the front line of land degradation for more than a decade now, I've witnessed firsthand the devastating impacts of the pandemic on rural communities, especially in LDCs, where restoration efforts were completely absent since the advent of COVID-19 for more than 2 years now. So it was really left completely to non-state actors like us, Green Hope Foundation, to initiate remedial restoration efforts in the face of tremendous adversity to really build resilience amongst these communities. So based on our lived experiences, I would strongly present the case for leveraging innovation, especially those that harness clean energy as a mechanism for restoration restoring degraded ecosystems while simultaneously building expertise amongst resident communities that really depend on them for their livelihoods. So agrivoltaics is one such innovative solution that we've implemented successfully across several villages in rural Bangladesh and India to rebuild the socioeconomic conditions of thousands of farming families whose lands were devastated by drought, and the pandemic literally sounded the death knell for many of them. So with many of the families also resorting to even selling their girls into an early marriage just to survive. So working in close collaboration with the local communities, we implemented agrivoltaics for the first time, especially in Bangladesh and in LDC. So it's a disruptive high-tech solution that's prevalent in some Western developed nations, but not so much or at all in the global South. And it incorporates the dual use of land for both agriculture and for energy, thereby relieving pressure on ecosystems and biodiversity, which resulted in food security of a vulnerable population through a net zero circular bioeconomy, and that then led to land degradation neutrality. So by leveraging this technology, we were able to effectively overcome the competition for land use through the creation of synergies between renewable energies and agriculture while promoting sustainable rural development and the protection of biodiversity, the land, and the ecosystem. So one of our project's key ingredients was the wholesome engagement of young people from within the community who became change makers to drive this transition of the from traditional farming methods. And most of these rural communities have unfortunately remained isolated and are extremely suspicious of technology. So facilitating their adaptation requires special attention, and hence all policies of restoration must also take into account mechanisms that promote inclusivity of all stakeholders. So a top-down, one-size-fits-all solution is completely ineffective. And I really feel that charting the way forward must also focus explicitly on intersectional challenges of land tenure and gender equality, something that my fellow panelists have brought up already, which I think is really great. And this is highlighted in Article 4 of the UNCCD Land Tenure Decision 26 at COP 14, which literally speaks about why it's so important to take into account gender-sensitive measures to combat desertification and drought. So really, for me, especially as a young woman of color working on the front lines, my call is for urgent action. My call is for more spaces where voices from these communities can be heard so that our policies and actions can become more specific and more effective to address local challenges and really cut across the red tape and corruption that has been or bane so far. So this is something that we at Green Hope Foundation are doing, which is something I, as a UNCCD Land Bureau, am doing. And I really hope that this call is for all stakeholders to really come together and address the intersectional challenges that are real, that face us right now as we try to move towards land degradation neutrality, because we simply do not have much time left. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this excellent intervention. What we will definitely take forward is your call for considering land right issues, land tenure, as an intersectional issue. It's cross-cutting. Of course, we need land tenure specialists. Of course, we need people working with sustainable land management, but it has to be embedded, and I will come back to it in my conclusions, in a cross-cutting way in UNCCD, but also in other areas and in other forums. Thanks a lot for it. In the meantime, it seems that our friend, Professor Alastair Alin-Sato, the Cabinet Director of the Benin Ministry of Development and Government Action Coordination, has joined us. Alastair, are you still online? I have seen your picture. I have seen you in the chat. Can you hear me? Because I would hand over the floor to you now for a 5-minute intervention before I'm doing the conclusions of this session. If you are still online, I have seen you, I have seen your name. Alastair, are you still here? Apparently not. Apparently he was on and off. Okay, so I would like to thank the three of you, Jean-Marc, Kekas Khan, and Femo, for your excellent presentations. And I would like to try to bring what all the participants have said, including the last panel, into my conclusions. I made a lot of notes here, and I try to make the best out of your inputs. And I would like to focus on 5 topics. The first one is the importance of governance. The second one is, let us carefully analyze the experiences in the countries. My third point is, what are the recommendations we can learn from the countries and from your interventions during the meeting? Number 4 is a thought. This came up during the session. What kind of longer term investment do we need in order to successfully maintain the dynamics that has been created? And number 5, building on what has just been mentioned, this land tenure decision of UNCCD has a huge relevance also for other Rio conventions. And I would like to briefly talk about it. So my 5 takeaway messages. Number 1, the importance of governance. We could see that there is a close linkage, if you do it right, between global governance and local action. The fact that CFS has adopted, after a 5 to 7 years process, the guidelines, the voluntary guidelines on good governance on access to land, and the 2 decisions of UNCCD get now mirrored by activities on the ground. I think that this global target setting had a huge impact on activities on the ground, and I will propose that also the activities on the ground will sooner or later lead to a review process of global governance decisions. Therefore, Vgdts, the 2 hallmark decisions of UNCCD, are a major step forward in advancing rights-based approaches to achieve the SDG target of land degradation neutrality, and it should play an important role in the review of SDG 5 on gender. First takeaway message. Second, we have heard from Violet, and I know what our colleague Alistair would have presented from Benin, how important it is that we have governments that are leading implementation of this decision on the ground. And we have, as TMG, worked together with governments of Benin, Kenya, Madagascar, and Malawi, and these governments are actively exploring how to protect the legitimate land rights of communities living in LTN priority areas. In close cooperation with local communities and other partners, and financed by BMZ, the German Ministry for Development Cooperation, we have mapped previously undocumented legitimate tenure rights. Now, someone might say, documenting legitimate tenure rights which have not been recognized before, what does this mean? We are building on the decision of the voluntary guidelines that recognize all legitimate tenure rights if they are documented or not. And what did we do together with partners on the ground to look who is living in an area that is called a land degradation priority area? What kind of rights do they have? And what can we do to safeguard the people's rights on legitimate tenure who live in and around priority areas? We do it in order to avoid conflicts, but also we would like to enable these people to become agents of transformation. Ecosystem restoration, land degradation neutrality needs people driving the agenda forward, and these are the people living on the ground. And very often these are the people, especially the women, who have land rights which have not been documented. And to this experience is also important to say that we have to create an enabling environment for land users to participate in land restoration. A decision in New York, let us restore degraded land, has to be translated into the reality of people every day working on the ground. And these are very often poor people. And therefore, we have to create an enabling environment so that they can actively participate and that we work for the better health of the planet, but also for better livelihoods of these people. This has to go hand in hand, and LDN and land rights is an important measure for it. These are the experiences. Now my takeaway message number 3, recommendation. Drawing on the analysis of what we have seen in the countries, I think we have the following recommendations. Before doing investments in LDN, it is vital to document the legitimate tenure rights of those people who live in the areas in which LDN investments will be made. Also, in order to enable these people. Second, women have less options than men to access land. Thanks, Violet, for telling the story. To access land and other natural resources, both inside LDN priority areas and also outside. Therefore, activities aiming at securing legitimate tenure rights should therefore prioritize women. And they need a targeted and specific approach and support. And this is also our recommendation for the review of SDG 5. Recommendation number 3, the inclusion of safeguards in current and future LDN policy and institutional frameworks to ensure that land degradation neutrality does not threaten the rights of people means that we have these safeguards to be included in local implementation arrangements. Maybe also, Jean-Marc, for Jeff, this could be a consideration to look at your financing. This is good that you are doing it, but what kind of safeguards do we need in order, especially for people with legitimate tenure rights, whose rights sometimes are not documented, in order to participate in restoration efforts and to improve their livelihoods? My takeaway message number 4, and I have 1 more minute, it requires, I'm convinced, long-term investment to align legitimate land tenure rights with conservation and restoration needs. So far, we are hearing a lot about what kind of technical support has to be given, what kind of processes do we have to set up. But it also has to include an element of capacity building. Where can the lessons that we have learned, where can all the good ideas and experiences, but also the problems and the things that are not going very well, where can they be collected, and how can we support upscaling efforts in the implementation of the land tenure decision by UNCCD COP? I think a deeper analysis to better understand the capacity building needs, the support needs, and the preconditions of upscaling is needed. So it also would involve investment in social innovation and in capacity building. And last but not least, land is the basis of all 3 Rio Conventions. There is no way that UNFCCC can achieve its targets without looking at land. There's no way that UNCCD, next COP in December, can achieve their targets without looking at land. UNCCD COP has made a real excellent decision, which now by a number of countries will be implemented. And therefore, my question to all of us is, shouldn't we try to bring the 3 Rio Conventions together in addressing land tenure-related topics in a more integrated and more synergistic way? I think this is the way forward. I see that Jean-Marc has raised the question, can we have a chance to react? If you do it in 30 seconds, Jean-Marc, you can do it, and then I'm going to close. I especially addressed you with the question safeguards and financing. I know you have something to say. Jean-Marc, you have 30 seconds, please.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexander. Very inspiring points. Just 2 points. The first point about governance, I guess we need to be a little bit more accurate because we know that we need change, we need transformation. And about governance, maybe the word is not enough accurate right now for the urgency we have. And I guess we need to talk about institutional change because we know that we need to have the different sectors, getting out from the silo approach and working together. Costa Rica is a good example when they transform the countries, increasing the level of development and improving actually the change in institutional framework at local level. And second, believe me, you know, and FEMO and colleagues from FAO can testimony that the level of safeguard of the GF is very high, but further and beyond the level of safeguard, I'm more interested when I'm reviewing project to see gender issues, indigenous people issues, local communities issue integrated in the result framework. This is the way to go, and this is the way for simplification without reducing the ambition. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jean-Marc. As someone who was involved in submitting proposals to GEF, I know that you have to be ambitious in order to get CHEF money, and this is exactly what I wanted to hear. And we would be happy to work with you in order to consider capacity building so that this can really be implemented on the ground. I would like to thank everybody for this excellent presentation, all the people who have participated. Let us be very clear. It is urgent what we need to do, but it is not enough to say that it is urgent. We have to say how we are going to do it, how we are going to solve problems, and how we are going to work together so that on the ground, decisions can be implemented in a way which is good for the health of the planet and the health of the people. Thanks a lot. I wish you a good day. Hope to see you soon in another meeting, maybe also face-to-face. It would have been lovely to have a glass of wine, a glass of beer, a glass of water, a cup of coffee together. Unfortunately, not yet possible. Thanks a lot. The meeting is over. It was a real pleasure.
Can we substitute this by a brief group photo, Alexander? If everyone switches her on his or her camera quickly.
If you tell me so, we are going to do it. But personally, I think this is not a substitute for a glass of wine. But please switch on your videos so that we can have a group photo. I see Kadea, colleagues from TMG, switch on your cameras if you're still online. I see Wasche, I see Ilse, I see Marcos from UNCCD. Great. Okay, colleagues, thanks. Was a good meeting. Let's continue to work together. It's a pleasure and it's necessary. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.